Hello and welcome. In this robot framework tutorial, we are going to learn about the data-driven testing in a robot framework. Now, before we get into the details of how you can achieve data-driven testing in robot framework, let's first understand what exactly is data-driven testing. So, data-driven testing means running the automated tests with different data sets. Say, for example, you have a login page, right? So this is the login page that I'll be using in this example. And you want to perform the different tests for username and password, or the different error messages that will appear for the invalid username and password entered, right? So for example, the first test case says when you enter the valid username and invalid password and click on login, you should get a separate message or some error message. Then you enter the invalid username and enter the valid password, then you should get another error message. So for example, here I'll take an example. If I take the logged out user and the password, then the error message is this user has been logged out, right? So there can be multiple scenarios, or say for example, I keep the username as blank and click on login. I'll get an error message, username is required, right? So these are some scenarios that you might be required to test, and the only thing that is changing in these scenarios is basically different username, password, and the error message. But rest everything or the steps will remain same. Now, when you have to achieve these 5, 6 scenarios, or say 8 scenarios in this particular case, there is a possibility that you will write 8 different test cases for to achieve this approach. Now, writing 8 different test case with all those common steps is not the good approach, and that's where data-driven testing comes in picture. Now, I'll go ahead and explain you how, if you don't utilize data-driven testing, how your test case will appear in that case, and if you utilize data-driven testing, how your code will look like. So it will be a lot better in case you are utilizing the data-driven test approach. So you can run your test case with different input data. Then the second point says that data-driven testing helps to achieve better test coverage, because say if you have to write, test case with which has to run with 40 different combination of data, then writing 40 test cases with all those similar steps with 40 different test data is a very tedious job. But if you use the data driven test approach, you write one test case and you put the test data for those 40 scenarios in an external file like CSV or Excel file or JSON file, and then your data driven test will fetch the data from that file and will pass it to the test and iterate your test 40 times. And that's a much better approach to achieve a better test coverage. And the next point is data driven test will read data from data storages. So as I explained, that you can store data in the built-in data that is available within the tools in many cases, or the external files, for example CSV or Excel file, or the database. You can directly fetch the data from the database and utilize in your scripts. So depending where your data is, you can implement the solution to fetch the data and use it in your data-driven tests. Now, data-driven test approach provides better code maintainability. So maintaining 40 test cases with different set of data is much tedious as compared to maintaining one spreadsheet with 40 rows of data and just one test script which utilizes those 40 rows of data and executes it, right? So that's more maintainable. And the last point I want to highlight is you can use data-driven test approach to prepare test data. So data-driven testing is not just to write your test cases. So many times, or most of the times when you are working in a project, there will be scenarios where you are required to prepare the test data. Say, for example, when there is a new build, you need to onboard 50, 100 new customers before you can start working with different scenarios for those new customers. And this sort of scenario, like onboarding 100 new customers, is very tedious if you are filling, like lengthy forms and onboarding the customer. So these sort of scenarios are the best fit or very good fit for data preparation. So you can just prepare all the test data for the customer in spreadsheet, keep it at one place, prepare a script to onboard the data, which will iterate through that spreadsheet and onboard 100 customers for you. So not only for data driven testing or the test cases verification, you can use data driven testing for preparing the test data before you can actually start testing further scenarios. So this is a brief introduction of what is data driven testing. Now when it comes to robot framework, we'll be covering data driven testing in robot framework. So the first approach we'll be covering is the built-in approach, which is the built-in functionality in the robot framework that is available to achieve data-driven testing. The next approach that we'll cover is the data-driven testing when the data is located into the external file, which is the CSV file. So we'll read the data from the CSV file and utilize that into our script. The third approach we'll discuss is the robot framework data driven testing when the data is stored into the Excel file. Okay, so we'll in this tutorial or in this particular tutorial, I'll cover the built-in approach, and then in further tutorial, I'll cover the approach for reading data from CSV and Excel. So let me go back to PyCharm, and prior to the data-driven built-in approach, as I explained, say for example, I want to test, so this is the script, which is a DDT demo named as DDT demo. So I have the settings section, I have imported the Selenium library, and then in the variable section, I have defined all the variables. So I have defined the URL for source demo and assigned the URL for that website to this variable. I have assigned the variable browser, Chrome to the variable browser, and then the locators as well. So username and password, these are the two variables, text box username and password, and a variable for the button locator and the error. Okay, so the error message that appears once I provide username and password and click on login button. So these are all variables that I have defined just to keep the script a bit simple. And then I have the test cases. So now what I'm going to verify is verify login fails when I provide wrong username. Verify login fails when the username and password is logged out. Right? So these are the 5 scenarios that if you are not utilizing data-driven approach, that's how you will write your test cases. So you'll open the browser, maximize the window, input text, click on the button. Then I'm using sleep just to show you the error message on the screen, and then verifying the error and closing the browser. So now you can see that with each of these test case, all the steps are exactly same except these data, right? So in the first test case, I have used the username as standard underscore US and the secret underscore sauce as the password. In the second one, I have used logged out user secret sauce. So, and the third difference is this message. So in the first case, message will be different. In the second case, the error message will be different. So these are the only three three data that are being changed in each of these test cases. if you look closely, right? So rest everything is all same. These are three things that are changing in all these 5 scripts. Now, say for example, I have to add another test case for just blank username and a valid password. Then I have to write the whole thing again in this file as a test case and provide different inputs in place of username and password and the error message if the error message is different. So this is the approach that you will take if you're not performing data-driven testing. Now with this case, say for example, you are having 15, 20 different scenarios to test with different data, your script will be very long and very, tedious to maintain. Now let's go ahead and execute this script and see the results. So with this script, when you will run, it will run 5 times. It will open the browser, do the test and close the browser, right? So I can use the test setup and tear down or the suite setup and tear down to externalize the open browser or the closed browser. But in this case, just to show you, I have kept in each and every test case. In the data-driven approach, we'll externalize the test setup and tear down so that it doesn't launch browser every time and close the browser every time, because the only thing we are changing is the username and password. So it has run, and let's go to the results and see the results. So here it will be very simple results. It has run with a blank username and password, logged out user, wrong password, wrong username, and wrong username and password. And all these test cases have passed. So if you go into the detail, you will see that with each of the test, it is passing the different username and password and verifying the error. Rest all steps are all same, right? So now coming back to PyCharm and then going to the built-in approach, right? So I have prepared the built-in data-driven approach file, right? So here, if you see, what changes I have done is uh, with this approach, you had to write your test case 5 different times, right? Now with the built-in approach, what you need to do is you just need to use the keyword test template, right? So like suite setup for starting of the test case, suite tear down for finishing the test case, right? So as I mentioned that in the previous test, I'm using open browser and close browser in each and every test case. So that we have used as suite setup and suite tear down to start the test case and finish the test case. And where these start test case and finish test case are defined, they are defined into the common file, common.robot file in the resources folder, right? So these are the user defined keywords that I have defined, and I'm using the open browser and maximize browser keywords in the start test case, and in the finish test case I'm using close browser keyword, right? Now when it comes to the built-in .robot, I'm just importing that common .robot so I can use these keywords that I have defined, start test case and finish test case, into suite setup and suite teardown. And then I have defined the keyword, right? So the keyword that I have defined in this built-in approach is the invalid login scenarios. And invalid login scenarios, there are 3 arguments that need to be passed in each test case. If you look at this demo here, the only thing that changes in these test case is username, password, and the error message, right? That's the only dynamic value that changes. All the other steps are all same for these test cases. So I have created a keyword which is invalid login scenario and then pulled all these steps like input text, in the username, in the password, click button, and element should contain, which is the verification keyword, into this particular invalid login scenario keyword section. right? So this is the custom keyword that I have defined with 3 arguments: username, password, and error message, and then defined all these steps here. And in the suite setup, all the browser launch or the website launch is defined in the start test case, which is suite setup, and closing the browser is defined in the suite teardown. So after defining this keyword invalid login scenarios, the only thing you need to do is just copy this and use the uh, test template option. Okay, so you just need to simply say test template, and as soon as you will hit enter, 2 spaces, and provide this particular keyword as a template, right? So that's what I have specified here. And now under the test case section, you just need to provide different test case that you want to run. So with the built-in approach, you just specify the test case with, so for example, blank username and password. This is the test case name. Whatever name you want to specify, provide that particular name, and then you can simply provide the test data. Okay, so because this keyword accepts 3 arguments: username, password, and error message, so you need to provide 3 arguments here. So for the first test case, we are running the test with a blank username and password. So I have specified the username as empty, so dollar curly brace empty if you are passing the blank value with the built-in approach, password empty, and the error message that I'm expecting in case of the empty username and password, right? At the top, I'm just using these placeholders to identify what these arguments are all about. So these are the username, these are the passwords, and these are the error messages for each and every scenario. So now this is the first test case. This is the second line, is the second test case with the um, arguments that we are passing, right? So it's the username, password, and the error message. The third test case, 4 test case, and 5 test case. So now if you compare this script with this old script, right? So this was very tedious sort of, it had a lot of code, unnecessary code in this particular script for each and every test case. But when we used the test template approach, right? So we defined all the common steps in a particular keyword, right? And then we utilize the suite setup and suite teardown to externalize or to use the start and finish of the script or the test case. Then this whole all those 5 test case or the script became a lot more readable and maintainable. Now, if I have to write a couple of more scenarios, say for example, verify login fails with wrong blank username and correct password, then I just need to add one line here, right? I'll just add one more line, which will be a new test case. I'll say blank username and password, and then I'll simply use the blank username, right? And I'll use the correct password. Okay, so I'll just use this password here, and then the error message that I'm expecting. Okay, so in this case, that will be the error message, right? Because there is the blank username, so in this case it will again display the error message username is required, right? So adding another test case is just adding one more line into this test case section here, right? So that's how you will implement the built-in data-driven test in the robot framework. The key thing to remember is the test template keyword, right? So this is the keyword that you will utilize to basically define that the keyword, the custom keyword that you have defined as invalid login scenario is the template, and that template, within that template you need to pass the arguments that you have defined in this particular keyword, and then that um, keyword or that template will iterate through the data that you will provide in these rows here. Okay, so let's run this script and see the results. So I'll just say built-in. So this is the built-in approach, and it will run 6 times now. So you'll see that it will launch the browser, and it will input. So first test case with blank user, with some other user, logged out user, standard user, right? So it will run 6 times. So there is one failure. We'll see what that particular failure is. So let's analyze the report and go to the results. You can see that with a blank username and password, it has failed. And the reason for that is because this particular test case has a wrong username and password, right? So in this case, there was a username already existing, and in the blank username and password, um, because with when the previous test case ran, there was username already. So in this case, I didn't clear the field, right? So that is why it didn't type in, or the field was not actually blank when I mentioned empty here, because the field username had the text already from the prior test case. So if I move this test case at the top, right, so that it finds that particular uh, field as empty, then it will be fine, right? So here, because once the application is launched, username and password field are already empty, so I don't need to clear them, right? So in this case, this will pass. So let's run again. Let me save and run the script again. So you can, anyways, in the actual scenario, you can clear the fields before you actually type in any value there. So this is just for demo purpose, so that's why I'm not clearing the field username and password. But in actual scenarios, it's always advisable or good approach to clear the field before you start typing. So you can see now all the 6 test cases have passed. If I open the report again, and now it's all green. Now you can see, if I analyze one of the tests, you will see that invalid login scenario. This is the template. This is the keyword, user defined keyword, that we have defined as the test template, right? And in the start test is the setup, right, where it opens the browser, and tear down is close the browser, and then within that start and finish, all the test cases are being run. Now with the blank username and password, if you see here, it has input the blank in the user field, right? And then it has put the password. I think the name is same, that's why it has printed the same name, right? Yeah, so the name, blank username and password, so the name is same. In this case, I'll say blank password, so it will print a different name, but that's fine. So you can see blank username and password, blank username and password, and then the values that it has passed in each of these test cases. So in this case, wrong username, so it has passed standard underscore US and then correct password, and verified the actual, error message that appears on the page. So that's all about the report, or the built-in data driven testing approach in the robot framework. The key thing to remember is defining the keyword of the common functionality of the test case, which have the common arguments that will be accepted in all those steps, and then defining that keyword as a test template and using that as, then within the test case, using the test case text and the arguments that you are passing for that particular test template. So pretty easy and simple to configure the data-driven approach with the built-in functionality in a robot framework. So that's pretty much all about the built-in functionality of data-driven testing in robot framework. Hope you like the tutorial. Please do share and subscribe, and thank you for watching.